Welcome. It's the end of the day, and we have Sara with us. Welcome.
I will try to make sure that you guys are not asleep by the end of this. We're gonna have some fun.
How are you? Thanks for being
Good.
here.
Thank you.
So nice to see you.
It's good to have you here. We met each other for the first time this weekend. We had talked on Zoom, so I didn't have the context. And she's like, "Hey, how are you doing?" I was like, "I'm great. How are you?" And she's like, "You have no idea who I am." She goes, and I was like, "But I feel like I do know you." She goes, "We just talked on Zoom." So there's a problem with Zoom. It's different than meeting in person.
Yes, it felt like a deja vu moment, right? I know all the students here are so excited to meet you, to hear your journey. Everyone here is looking for that first amazing job. Why don't we start with your journey? Your first job or that first opportunity who got you in the door.
Okay, so I went to the University of Florida, home of the Fightin' Gators. Sorry, I had to say that. No, they're not paying me for this. I just am a fan. And my actual first opportunity was in the school. We had a television station and we had a radio station. It was an NPR station that did a news block that the students both produced and performed. So I started actually in radio. And I got my first paying job. I was just thinking about this while I was in college at another radio station that did, music, pop music, and I was the newsreader. I had to change my name because for some reason back then we couldn't use our real names, so I was Sara Sykes on the radio. Don't ask. My last name's Sara Sidner, like it's not that far. But everyone teases me about that went to college with me. They're like, "Remember when you were Sara Sykes?" I was like, "Yes, thank you." I was making minimum wage, which I think was like $3.85 an hour.
$3.
I know, but it was money. And to be honest, a large pizza was $4. I sound like I'm 100 years old, but but a large pizza was $4. So I was like, 1 hour of work equals one large pizza. Fine, sign me up. And so that's where I started getting just some experience on what it's like to be on a microphone, how to project and speak slowly enough, because I'm a real fast talker, I can talk like this all day, and to just sort of pace yourself. And I learned a lot of things, but in the school, obviously, I was learning about journalism, the ethics of journalism, the history of journalism, and I felt like those are really important classes. Also recognizing that you don't have to go to journalism school to be a journalist. I do think that it's important to have the ethical background on what it is you can and should not do when you're dealing with people that maybe have never or don't know how the media works. And so that's where I got my first start in school. And I was shooting my own, then when I started doing the TV station side, I was shooting my own stories, doing my own, we wrote, we shot, we edited our own pieces. Best training I've ever had. I would not give that up for the world, knowing how to do all that. How many of you know how to edit, nonlinear edit? Of course, like everybody. Back then, because I'm 100 years old, I used to take a carriage to work and, no, but we had tape to tape. So you had to physically in point, out point, and if you made a mistake, you had to start from the beginning. So it wasn't like, on our cell phones, we can cut things and then we're like, "Oh, that's terrible," and then you erase it, and then you couldn't do that. You literally had to start over. So imagine that happening on a deadline. No bueno, like hard when it goes wrong, and it goes wrong. You have to be able to deal with that. But after school, my very first job was in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, hometown of Rush Limbaugh. And the thing is, people always go, "How did you know that?" I was like, because when you drive into town, there's a huge sign that says hometown of Rush Limbaugh. And I had never been there. I didn't know anyone in the town. And I accepted a job. I had done an interview somewhere else. They were looking for people of color. They didn't have any, apparently, on the air. And so this company was like, "We are looking for people who'd be willing to come here." And so lesson number one, I was terrified. Okay, I'd never seen this place. I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know who I was going to be working with. No idea. But lesson number one was you got to push past the fear, right? You have to push past all of those fears that we have when it comes to meeting new people. And I'm still a little like, don't tell anyone, but I don't love parties with a lot of people. If there's like 5, I'm good. If there's like 50 or 200, or it's a lot. And people don't believe that, but it's true that I get like a little anxious going into scenarios like that. But yeah, my first job, I interviewed with 5 news directors from around the country, and people, you know, and there is a negative side isn't the word I want to use, stigma. There is a stigma because people knew in the company that I was coming in as an EEOC hire. Now, luckily, equal opportunity. Luckily, there was another young lady who was also there with me doing the same thing. They had hired 2 people. We worked very closely together. But I could hear the whispers. It's like, they're not good enough. They're just here because they're black. I got all that. She heard it too. But the people that we worked with directly were lovely, and they helped us. They taught us the ropes, the photographers, the producers. But there were some whispers, and I really didn't like that. It hurt because we worked our butts off. She went to, she was at school in Missouri, and both of us like killed ourselves to get that first job, and actually went through a lot more than you would if you were normally just going to a station and sitting down with the news director of that place. We had 5 judging us all at the same place, all at a big, huge table. So it was quite grueling for a college student. I got there, I drove my little car, my sad little car, filled it with stuff, that's all I had. I didn't grow up with a lot of money, so like I needed to get paid to get that first apartment. It was rough, but I learned a lot in that place.
And what advice could you tell your younger self now, like knowing what you know now, and you're back in that moment, you know, what advice could you give yourself that could maybe help the audience here?
Stop worrying. Stop wasting your time worrying that you're never going to make it, and that it's never going to get better, and that you're never going to be able to pay off your student loan. I did, woohoo, pay off my student loan. But I mean, to me, that was like, all this money is like crushing me inside. I was like, how in the earth am I going to pay this money? And back then, I gotta stop saying back then, I really am not that old. I would like to report that Michelle Yee, who is sitting over there, who is a sophomore, thought I was a student, so I'm feeling real good about myself today. I was like, do you think I'm a student? She's like, yeah, I figured maybe you're getting towards graduation. I was like, I really, thank you. But you know, I didn't grow up having the resources to easily pay off or not even have loans. And my mama certainly was not trying to pay my loan. So I knew I needed to get a job quickly out of school. So I was terrified while I was in school that I was never going to get a job, because so many people say, like, you're never going to get a job in this business. You're never going to do well. You don't get into it for money. You're never going to make any money. Like, you have to love it. You have to. It's like, yes, some of those things are true, but you can get a job and you can make okay money and you can do it. It just takes time. No one ever said that part. But I had met some lovely people at that first job that really helped me. So I think the other thing I would tell myself is trust the people who are clearly for you, who come to you, who offer their help. I do not care what color, what background, who they are, where they came from, but if there are people that offer to help you genuinely and you can feel that, take them up on it. Don't try to do everything yourself. I am hard-headed, and I'd be like, no, I'm fine. I'll figure it out. No, girl. They're standing right in your face to help you figure it out. So that was another thing that I had to learn, is to put a little bit of trust in people who genuinely are there to help you, who want to see you do well. Not everybody does. You all know this already. You've lived a life. That is another big piece that I wish I would have known then.
You were so lucky that you actually started learning while you were still in school.
Yeah.
Some of that skill set that you brought for that first job. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's important for the young people in this room also to know what should they do, getting to apply for that first job.
How many of you have had jobs, summer jobs, you worked during college, you've had a part-time job, so almost everybody. And how many of you have, at that job, been asked to do something where you're like, that is not my job? Okay. Everything is your job. Everything. If you want to do this job, make it your business to know the business. Everything. I learned to edit at school. I was terrible at it, but I got better. I learned to shoot, which is not the word I want to use. Video, film. Oh, gosh. We didn't have cell phones. I didn't get my first cell phone until 2000. So, I did not have a cell phone at work until the year 2000, which sounds crazy to me, which was 23 years ago. Okay. But learn the business. Learn every facet that you can. The one thing I never learned was the business side of the business, which I'm learning now and trying to understand it. Because we were always told, separate yourself from the business side of the business. You are a journalist. You shouldn't have to worry about that, blah, blah, blah. Yes, you do. Layoffs happen. You need to understand how this works, why that happens, how much money the company is making, how to negotiate. All of those things I learned on the job and am still learning. But every job is your job. Learn how to produce. Even if you don't want to do that, learn how to shoot. Even if you don't plan on doing that, and edit. Most of you already know some of this because you have cell phones, you're already doing it. I see some of your Instagrams and some of your TikToks, you're already doing it, right? You guys are going to be way more comfortable on camera than I was. I was terrified on camera. And so any skill that you can pick up if you want to be in this business, if you want to be in the television side, or if you want to be in the digital side, it's all the same. You will do it all. I write for the digital property. I also write for the TV side. So I have edited things at CNN because we had short staff when I lived in India for 4.5 years for CNN. And sometimes I wanted the photographer to cut the beautiful story that he and I had sort of put together. And so I'm like, I'll take care of cutting the short stuff, the VOs and stuff that they need, the voiceovers. You concentrate on making that pretty. And so sometimes we would do that. And he taught me how to nonlinear edit, which is what you're doing with your phones and with Final Cut Pro. And how many of you have Apple? I'm an Apple user, but whatever you're using, I had to learn that on the job in India because a photographer was for me. He sat me down and for 8 hours, he yelled at me so that I would get it right. And I'm so thankful to him. So, so thankful, because now that's a skill I get to keep. If I walk away, I can still make my Instagrams cute. You know what I mean? I still know how to do it. So any skill that you can pick up, I would say it is never not your job. Do it. Learn it. If you learn to manage people, good on you. That's not my gig, but good on you. Anything you can learn, try to learn it.
I'm sure everyone heard about Sara's incredible background. She now has a very successful show on CNN News Central in studio. But the international experience, can we talk a little bit about that? Because I do think that as a young person thinking, wow, I'm gonna take the leap, get on a plane and go across the country or, away from this country. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I had been in local for a long time. So I was no spring chicken when I decided to sort of pick up my life and kind of throw my old life away and jump into a very different one. I was very happy where I was. I was in Oakland, California, working for a local station there that was like family, a dysfunctional family, but still, all families tend to be a little bit dysfunctional. It felt like family, and I loved them, and to this day, I'm still friends with the people that I worked with there. That being said, there came a point in my career where there was something else I wanted to do, and they couldn't offer it to me. And so one of the hardest things I think I ever did, because I actually liked it, like I would have stayed there for a long time if they could have offered me international experience. But I decided at some point that that's what I wanted to do. And so when I had a chance, I went and interviewed with a bunch of the networks. And CNN was the only one that said, no, you don't have to start in New York. Why don't you go talk to our international group? Because we see that's what you want to do. So I did, and I told them the truth. Like, I'd never lived and worked abroad. So I don't want to sell you a bill of goods, but I do know how to be a good reporter regardless. And those fools bought it. And I say that because I was so over my head, like I was drowning. And I was like, you are either going to sink or swim. Like, you're either going to flame out, and you have to be willing to let that be a possibility, or you're going to do fine. But there's not going to be any in between where you're just sort of okay. It's either going to be you're going to do well, or you are going to crash. And the first big assignment I got, I moved to India. I got a job with CNN. I went to Atlanta, where our headquarters was at that time, for 4 days. Picked up my equipment and left to India, a country I've never lived in and don't know anyone in. It was terrifying and exhilarating and exciting and all the things you can possibly imagine. And the one reason why I am still at CNN today and survived all that, learning the country, learning CNN, which is a behemoth company with 5,000 people in the newsroom. I mean, you can't possibly know everybody or everything. Plus a country that's one of the most complex countries in the entire world. It is endlessly interesting and endlessly complex. The photographer, the same guy that taught me how to edit, taught me how to CNN, if you will, and he taught me about India, and he took his time, and I was with his family, and I learned about the culture in ways that I never would, because I was let in. I was just let in. And I cannot thank Sanjeev Talreja, like, bless him forever, because I don't think I would have survived this company or India at the same time without his nurturing. He wanted to see me do well, and he knew that if I did well, he did well. Like, it's a thing. And so to this day, I would fight for that man for whatever it is he needed. But that experience was really scary, and people thought I was absolutely nuts, because I had been offered an anchor position Monday through Friday, cushy job, like, 5 o'clock, I would be off by 6. I mean, that doesn't happen in news much, right? So people were like, what are you doing? This could be terrible for you. And I thought that too, but I decided I couldn't live with the regret of not trying.
And obviously, as an international correspondent, your life was in danger at times, Just tell us a little bit more about that, like your passion for actually wanting not to regret not taking this job.
How many of you speak a second language? I love you guys. I mean, you're already ahead of me in if that's what you want to do. I did not, my Spanish is broken and pretty bad. I grew up in Miami, and I used to speak fluently, and then over the years, I just sort of lost it because I didn't use it. But Spanish doesn't help you in India, in case you were wondering. I tried. I mean, to be fair, like, much of the Indian population speaks at least 2 languages, either English and Hindi, English and Telugu. So they have this incredible ability to pick up language, because they've had to already, right? The British Raj, we won't get into the history, but so I did not speak the language there. And for me, that was terrifying, because I'm reporting on the country. So I had to have help. And a lot of international work, you can't speak the language of every country you go to, because after that, I ended up in Afghanistan, I ended up in Libya during the Arab Spring, in Egypt during the Arab Spring. I eventually moved to Jerusalem. And I was in the middle of these really tense and sometimes actual wars and conflicts, and you have to have somebody there who speaks the language perfectly. And so we have people, what I call them local producers, or we call them fixers, who literally fix things for you, help you get interviews, help you do interviews with different people as translators. They're incredible journalists. Many of them are journalists. In Libya, we had someone who was a rebel who had just decided he was going to come in from Germany, and he helped us. We didn't, I mean, you know, it was a very wild scenario. But to me, the education I got in school was good. The education I got in life going abroad was the best education I think I will ever get in this lifetime. I learned so much about our own country, so much about the country I lived in, and so much about the region of South Asia and Southeast Asia. I've been to Bangladesh. I've been to Thailand. I mean, I think I've been to 50 countries at this point. I mean, and getting to report there. So you have to learn what's going on in that particular place. Oftentimes we focus on the bad, so obviously we show up and there's been a terrorist attack or there's been something negative, but I would always make a couple of days so that I could see what regular life was about. And I cannot tell you, I have friends everywhere, I have people that I absolutely love and adore and respect everywhere, and if something happens somewhere, I can often pick up the phone and call somebody I know and say, hey, what is going on? Is this really that big, or what's happening? Can you give me some information? And they will. But it was a wonderful education. And if that's something that you're interested in, whether you're, let's say, your family or immigrants, they came from another place and you're interested in telling that story. I'll give a quick example. There was a woman who was, oh gosh, where was she? I was just thinking both Ethiopian and there was something else. She was from Darfur. And she was reporting there for a station. And she ran into her uncle who had just escaped all of the, it is so touching to see them, because you hear her go, uncle? And then, so he made it out. Things like that happen, where you bump into people, you cannot believe it. You also lose people, because if you're covering war, believe you me, the people that are there helping you or who are local there, who have to stay when you get to leave, sometimes you never see them again, and that's hard. I've seen a lot of horrible things that I will never get over, but I've also gotten so much incredible love from the people that I was around at the time, so I wouldn't give that up for the world.
So you've been telling us about some of the challenges, also the rewarding moments of being an international correspondent, then come back here to the U.S. How have you been able to apply some of those skills and that education in your job now?
It's a really good question. She's good. She's really good. So I got back here in the end of 2013. I had a really hard time adjusting, to be honest. I came to LA and everyone's like, oh, you're back home. I'm not from LA. What gave you that idea? It's because I was in the Bay Area in California and they just assumed. So I'd never been to LA, and I was like, this is so weird. I'm leaving, I was in Abu Dhabi at the time. I'm like, I'm leaving Abu Dhabi, and now I'm in Los Angeles. Like, how does that make any sense? This business is crazy. It makes sense. It's just how it is. I had a hard time adjusting. I was so used to the story being already dramatic or not having input from the company. Because when you're out in a place like India, you're telling them what's happening in the country. You're telling them what's happening politically. What are some of the big stories? And then they say, oh, we'd like you to tell this one or that one. And then you go out and you do it. Or you tell them, this is a story I have. Like, you guys got to see this. Like, this is really important. And you find a place for it. Not the same in the United States, because guess what? They already know what's going on in the United States. So I had a really hard time adjusting. I had, like, I guess you could call it reverse culture shock, because I'd been gone for 7 years. And I hadn't come home that much. So it was rough. And then there was a point at which, in 2014, Michael Brown was shot and killed by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. And because I was known for covering conflict, they're like, you're used to conflict. Why don't you go and cover this for a little bit? And I stayed for a year, basically, off and on. But I mean, I was there for months on end, then I'd leave for a week, and then I'd come back for months on end. And it was a real wake-up call to me, because when you're out of America as a black person, and you are seen in other countries as just an American, that's how people talked about me. They were like, oh, the American's here. Oh, you're an American. You're American, America. Everywhere that I would go, it's never, you're a black woman, you're black, you're blah, blah, blah. So I came back to the country, and I had somehow forgotten in some ways what still existed here. And it was like a punch in the face, because I was like, we're not over this yet? We haven't moved on? I mean, in my head, I had moved on because I had been out of it and concentrating on the issues. And believe me, colorism is an issue everywhere, but issues that were very different. And I came back to this, and it really sent me to a dark place, just seeing all of this unfold and seeing the way that the response to the protest were bringing out, you know, huge machines that looked like something that belonged in war. I was like, what is going on? So I had a hard adjustment. But from there, the social justice movement really exploded, and I followed it. Up until now.
And let's talk about that story. It was I think one of the, start of the big movement of stories. I was actually also there. Tell me why diversity is so important in front and behind the scenes. And I think it pretty much started there, and even with Trayvon Martin before that case.
I mean, when you are watching, and I'm in television, so you could apply this to everything, but it's sort of hard to imagine yourself doing something when you don't see anyone that looks like you or has your background, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's a little bit more difficult to sort of imagine yourself in that position, because you literally are like, well, I don't think they allow people like me to do this. That also goes for people who have different socioeconomic backgrounds, and I think that's one of the places where we fall down, because it's expensive to do this. You have to have clothes. I used to call my mother, like, every Christmas, it was like, how many jackets can you get me? Like, that's what I want for my Christmas present, so that I can look nice on television. And it's you laugh, but it was really a stressful thing. Like, every day you're supposed to have something a little different. And that was before Target was big. Now I'm like, Target. Love Target. But so I think it's so hard to visualize that. But also, we had these conversations that we'd not had before as a company in this way. And one of the conversations, we have editorial calls, like any newspaper or magazine or news station has, and where people chime in and they talk about the different issues and what are the big issues of the day and what should we be covering, et cetera, et cetera. And someone on the call said, as the social justice movement continued on, and we kept seeing all of these videos, right, because people have cell phones, and they started showing these videos and these confrontations, and people were like, whoa, I didn't realize. And someone on the call said, I think we should do something about the fact that, like, we had no idea, Americans had no idea how bad this was, this relationship between black people and police, just had no idea until these videos came out. And I was like, beep. Black people knew. You didn't believe them. Right? And there was dead silence on the phone. But you need to be in the room where decisions are made, as well as whatever else it is you want to do, because you need to make sure that there is a voice there, even when it's scary and even when it's not popular, to say, like, hey, actually, you talk to any one of my uncles, you talk to any one of my friends, like, they've all had an experience that was negative, which is why this relationship has gotten so out of hand as well. And so I think it's really important that you have input. And I'm not talking just about black folks. I'm talking about people from all backgrounds, whether you're a different religion, whatever it is, different socioeconomic background, whatever that is, you have a voice, and it's really important, especially when you're really uncomfortable. Because if you're uncomfortable, it means that the conversation has not included you or someone that has had your same experience. And you need to feel that and be comfortable enough to speak up. And that was hard, but I could not even help myself because I'd been out in the streets and I was just like, you guys, come on, like, you gotta, I'm like, one of the things that has happened is that if you don't believe what people are saying because you don't see it and now you see it, you think it's new when it's not new. So that's one of the other things is like being in those rooms where decisions are made and not just being in the room, saying something when something needs to be said. If you have a counterpoint to make the point. Make the point, because if you don't speak up, then nothing changes. And the way it's covered will not change either. And you will be a part of that. And it's rough, because people are going to come for you. People came for me too. They're like, wait, you guys are saying this and you're only showing that. I said, I got you, I understand, you're correct, or I disagree, whatever it is. But you can always correct the coverage because you're there and you have a voice.
And it's so amazing now you have your own show, so you can actually have an input to what you're going to cover. What type of stories do you hope to see, or do you cover on your show?
Our show, sometimes it's hard, we all have input, but we do a lot of things that are happening at that time because things like the Supreme Court decisions come down at 10 o'clock. Our show's on from 9 a.m. Eastern till noon. So a lot of things happen, meetings happen, and unfortunately, school shootings happen within those hours, which is a horrible thing to think about, but it's true. So we are often caught up in dealing with the breaking news and telling people what's going on. The stories I think that in general that news fails on are stories that are solution-oriented. We will tell you the problem all day long. We have always been taught, and I don't know what they're teaching now, but I think it's similar. It's like you shine a light on an issue, on a problem, so that somebody, not necessarily you're the journalist, but you shine a light on what's happening, and you hope that a solution, somebody does something, a legislator does something, a city council person, someone on the Board of Ed does something to fix it. The problem is we shine so many lights on so many problems that at some point we're all overwhelmed and we're like, well, the world just sucks and I'm not watching the news because it's really negative. We got to fix that somehow. And I think we try at the end of the show to try and give people something, but I think solution-oriented journalism is a good idea. It's hard to implement, but it's a good idea.
If anyone have ideas, please send them Sarah's way.
Exactly.
So she can feature them on her show. I know it's very difficult also because we are in the news, right? So we have to go with the news when it comes to our coverage at all times. Even now with your show, if there are roadblocks, stories that you may want but other people don't want, like how do you manage that?
Usually when we speak up. I mean, look, it sometimes depends on your experience level, the way people respond to you, what they think your experience level is, because you have, again, lived in a community and lived a life, and you may know a lot more about some subject than your boss or someone else. But we tend to have robust conversations. One of the issues with my show is that they start planning for this the day before while we're doing the show, and then into the overnight hours, and at 4 or 5 in the morning, we're getting what's called a rundown, which has like what the stories of the day that we cover. But a couple of times I've chimed in and said, hey, we ought to look at this. This is something we should cover. Just recently, you had this almost really hard to watch killing of a man on the subway. And I know you've all seen it, and it is like, I mean, I start recoiling sometimes where it's like, I don't want to see it because I covered George Floyd and I watched that video so many times that like it gives me nightmares to this day. And there is also video of him as a performer, doing impersonations of Michael Jackson. And I didn't see that on our air all day. Like in the morning, I was like, I've seen this other places. Like, do we have this? And we have to approve this. By the way, that video, we cannot just take it off of social media and be like, this is him, and this is, we have a process. First of all, we usually ask permission of the person, especially if it's old and they've posted it like, hey, we're with CNN, do you mind if we post or use your video? Secondly, we need to make sure it's actually him, because there is nothing worse than doing that and having it be someone else. So there is a process that takes a little longer, which is why sometimes you don't see it on our air as quickly, because we go through a pretty lengthy process on something like this. But once it was clear it was him, I was like, you know, it's easy to dehumanize someone when all you see is the end result of something, and then people start talking about this and that and criminal histories and all this stuff. I'm like, we have to get to the human part of this. So let's try to find that video, make sure we get it approved, even if we have to do it to go through the process. Let's get that on. This is part of this person's life who is no longer with us. So it's little things like that. It's not necessarily pushback. It's that you bring something to the table and you should share it if you feel like, hey, I think we can do better. Yeah.
Absolutely, and it's so important to humanize everything that we cover. I know the students are very eager to ask you questions. Any final words of advice, implementing your past, your career, for them to start their career journey?
I know you've heard this before. Push past the fear. People have said, there are even articles that say, Sara Sidner, fearless in Libya. Child, I was afraid. I was afraid. Like, I have to have conversations with my mom and my husband to be at the time saying, okay, if I don't return home, and I had this every time I would go into a conflict or war zone, if I do not return home, know how much I love you, which is with my entire heart, and also that I have lived the life I wanted. Know those two things, don't ever forget it, and don't be sad for too long. Right? I mean, it's the shortest amount of mourning that you can possibly do because I want you to live a happy life. But that's a hard conversation to have. And I usually get scared afterwards. But that initial feeling of fear, there's a difference between fear that saves your life. You don't want to walk out in front of a bus. Hopefully you jump back, right? Oh my God. And the fear that stops you from being who you really are. Be who you really are. I don't care what your parents say. Sorry, parents. I don't care what your teachers say. I love my mama, but I'm just saying. I don't care what you've been told in school, what your friends are telling you. You need to find, you know who you are. You know who you are by now. You knew who you are when you were born. You learned about different things, but at your core, who are you? Figure that out and then stick with it, because your authentic self is worth a lot. It took me a long time to get here. It took me a long time to get, I was trying to be everyone. I was trying to be like all the different people that I had seen on the screen. That's who I was trying to be. Mike Wallace, like one of my favorites, right? I was like, I am going to be Mike Wallace. I'm going to go for the jugular. I'm going to go for them. I'm going to go after them. I'm going to, all this stuff. And I learned that's not your style. You're an actually curious person. If the person's hard to interview, let them be hard to interview. And say, like, why are you being like this? Like, call them out. But your style is different. Find your authentic self and do that.
Amazing last words. So everyone, do you want to line up and ask questions for the Q&A? Come on. I know you guys have questions. There's 2 mics. You want to start? And introduce yourself and tell us what school you were with.
Does it go down? Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Princess. I'm actually an intern for this.
Wait, stop. Nope. How did you get that? That's a great name.
Oh, my aunt named me. She named me Princess. Yeah.
Sweet.
It's like a Ghanaian thing.
We got a new story over here. Like, love it. Okay.
Yeah, thank
Princess.
you.
I love it.
So I'm super interested in basically just your perspective at life and like your career and your trajectory is like super inspiring. I love the words that you've used today. I feel like there's a lot, not just myself, but everyone here can take from what you've spoken about. I had a question because I'm super interested in your international affairs. I wanted to ask specifically just your personal take on when you were discussing about returning back to LA from, was it Abu Dhabi?
Yes.
Yes. So I wanted to know, like you explained, like it was hard adjusting, and I wanted to know, like in terms of everyone, like knowing what's going on in the area you were in, was it hard in the sense of like, because you said you were the person that like had to report about what's going on abroad, but like now you're in a space where like you have to sort of report to I guess like everyone knowing, in that sense, everyone knowing what's going on.
Yeah.
But like, did you feel like you lost a sense of like value from not being that directory, or like people being dependent on you to figure out like, okay, what's the news? Like, what's the latest? Did you feel like you lost value in that sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that was the hard part. I had to humble myself, if you will. Like, I was like, why aren't they taking this story? Like, this is a good story. You know what I mean? Like, I had to go, okay, you need to reset because you are now dealing with a whole different set of, now, these are still, this is domestic. We have domestic and international. It's how CNN sort of talks about its two properties. We have CNN International, which is you go out of this country and that's what you're going to see. And every now and then you'll see CNN shows, the domestic shows on international, but we have a whole nother company called CNN International. And then we have CNN Domestic, which is here in America, and you don't see CNN International, right? Which is about what's happening in this country. And we do international news, but generally, most of it is what's happening here. So yes, I felt uncomfortable. I felt that I wasn't seen the same way, that I was gonna have to fight again to be seen, all the things, right? And I also felt like I knew less about my country than when I left, because a lot of things had happened.
Yeah.
I left in 2008. What happened in 2008? Historic moment.
Obama.
Oh my God, a lot of things happened, y'all. See, I wasn't here. I wasn't here for it. But the first black president happened, right? And I'm in India watching this go down. And I'm like, I am missing the biggest story. Wow. So I did feel a bit of a loss of value. And I had to learn how to regain that, because some of that, honestly, sometimes it is just your ego, because I can't know everything, and I want to. I'm being really bad, but it turns out my mom was right about most things that I was like arguing with her about. Do you know what I mean? So there was a little bit of me having to adjust my ego, because I was so used to feeding the company what I thought was the important story, and me backing up a little bit and going, okay, wait. They've been doing this, so I need to adjust. But I mean, I struggled with that. I really struggled to figure out what it is where I fit in, I guess is the best way to put it. So yes, it was a struggle. It took me 2 years. It took me about 2 years.
So do you feel like you're in a position now that you feel like more comfortable or like valued in a sense?
Yeah, and this was partly me. Like, I can't like put this on the company. It was me trying to sort out where I belonged and what stories I wanted to tell and how I could get those stories on. It was sort of having to rework how I thought of my value at the company. But yes.
Thank you
Great
so
question,
much.
Princess.
Thank you, Princess. Ashley, hi, how are you?
Hi, my name is Ashley. I'm from CUNY Lehman College, attending grad school in the fall. My main goal is to become a news anchor like you, and the first disabled anchor. So my question to you is, how you bring it up without being rude or negative? Basically, what I'm trying to say is I like to advocate for the disabled community, specifically for people of color. So how do you integrate trying to tell that story without telling the newsroom with an attitude, or are you trying to be like the B word? Because I tend to say it, but it's just I'm passionate, and these are conversations that are not happening, but I want to say it without being rude or disrespectful. And then another question that I have is, how do you take care of your mental health on everything that you've experienced? Because I love journalism, but how do you take a step back?
Those are two really good questions. Is everybody in here 18 years of age or older? Okay, just checking, because she said B word, so I was like, uh-oh.
That's why I said B. I don't want.
I was like, I just wanted to make sure, but yes, and that was very respectful. I respect that. How do you sort of advocate for your community in a newsroom where maybe other people are not familiar or don't know without having an attitude? Is that?
Yeah, without being aggressive, rude, or disrespectful.
Yeah. It's hard. No, it's hard, because sometimes it's frustrating, right? Sometimes you say something over and over again, and it's like, they're not getting it. I find that one-on-one conversations are better than group conversations. And that truly having someone sit and listen to you, because it's just you and them, and whether it's you and a boss or you and a producer, I find those far more fruitful than yelling to a crowd, to sort of talking to a group of people who are all, because half of them are half listening anyway with their cell phones. We all do that now, right? I find one-on-one conversations. Every now and then, no boss is going to like this. Sometimes getting an attitude is like necessary. Sometimes, and it's rare, maybe 2 or 3 times at the company where I've been like, hey, like, are you not hearing, like, are you not hearing what, does what I'm saying matter, resonate? Like, could you know what I mean? Like, every now and then, it's like, come on now.
Fighting with a wall.
Yeah, let's really talk about this. It's really bothering me. But being professional requires you to try a million other ways before you get to that point. Like, anything else you can think of, usually sugar works a lot better than salt. So honey or whatever you were eating, stevia. It's because what happens when you're negative, when you come in with an attitude or they immediately get defensive. Immediately. And so do we, by the way. Like, this is not just a boss thing. This is just a human thing. So when you come at someone and they feel like you're coming for them, what do? Shield up, and then they've dismissed some of what you're saying because they think you're coming at them to attack. And so they're going to defend themselves. It's just a human response. To your other question, which is much harder, she's asking basically, right, what do you do with all these feelings and all the things that you experience? Because if you're going to do this and be especially a general assignment reporter, you're going to see things you wish you had never seen. You're going to experience things you wish you had never experienced. And that's happened over and over and over again. I haven't dealt with it all that well, to be honest. I struggled quite a few times. I thought about leaving the business quite a few times because it all piles up. It all piles up. It's not something where you have this one experience and then you go on to the next thing and you completely forget about it. When something powerful happens and it's horrible, that doesn't go away. It's then it's in your body, and you have to deal with it. What has helped in recent times is that we're starting to talk about it. It's sort of miraculous because journalists are the worst when it comes to that stuff. It's like, no, I don't need any help. I'm fine. It's a child. I'm not going to therapy. Whatever. We'll just go on to the next story, right? And we've been doing it for a long time. But someone who worked with me committed suicide in the last 5 years. And I was so shocked. They had moved on to another company, and I was so stunned. And I couldn't understand. It was like a dream job this person had just gotten. They moved on to this company. It was like the thing they wanted to do. And next thing I know, I'm like, what? That was a real wake-up call for me. It was a real wake-up call because I don't know what all the circumstances were, but I do know that we are all affected by what we do on a daily basis. We spend sometimes 17, 18 hours a day dealing with the worst horrors of people's life. And so I'm still trying to deal with that. Talking to other journalists really helps, but sometimes getting professional help is the answer. Thank you for that question. It's really good.
Thank you, Ashley. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Suzanne Britskaya, and I just graduated Baruch in this May.
Woo!
I had a quick question. I'll try to not make it controversial because anything with politics is controversial. So with all the news that's going on and Don Lemon being resignated and Tucker Carlson is having a case of defamation, and both of them being fired, how does that affect some of your work in journalism?
Look, whenever in your business, whatever business you are in, whenever there are layoffs or firings, it's scary, period. You start thinking about yourself. I know we get a little self-centered there, but like your first response is you feel bad for a colleague. Natural, right? Your second response is, uh-oh. Because it's a reminder that you can be replaced. And this goes across the board. It doesn't matter if you're in accounting or if you are the head of a company, because I've seen them go too, right? So I think your first response is a survival response where you start thinking, okay, and this is just me, and maybe I'm cuckoo, you can tell me later, but have I saved enough money? I didn't come from money, and that was hard, right? And I want my mom to be okay, and I want myself to be okay, and I want my friends and my family, you know what I mean? I want to make sure that I can sustain myself for a while. So I literally started checking my accounts. Okay, 5, 6, like literally. Because there is something intrinsic in seeing that happen to someone and immediately after feeling for them, thinking, okay, what would I do? What would I do?
Yeah,
That wasn't a
sometimes
controversial
you got to
question.
think about yourself because that could happen to you potentially. You never know.
You never know. And in this business, it can be very fickle. Yeah. One day, you're, the best thing since sliced bread. I mean, you guys have experienced this in a way that I didn't. Guess why? Social media. You can put something out there that you're not thinking, and you just respond to somebody or whatever, and all of a sudden, people are coming for you knives out. And I actually feel bad for this generation who's had to deal with that kind of pressure from people you don't even know, right? Who don't have anything to do with your lives. So that can happen to anyone as long as you're posting. If you stop posting, you're safe. But then, there are other problems. But yeah, so I think it's self-preservation. We all think about it anyway, because it can be a fickle business.
Yeah. Thank you so much for answering.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, Sara, and hi, Sabina. My name is Melissa Ostoria. I go to LaGuardia Community College. I am working on my associate's degree in mass communications. My ultimate goal is to become a news anchor. I'm looking for ways on how to get my foot in the door, get some experience. But my question to you is, so what makes a news anchor good, and what makes a good story good without losing your authenticity? And then also, in adjacent to that, what made you decide to pursue a career as an anchor, and what makes you passionate about it? Since you mentioned that there were many times that you wanted to, just...
This might be news to my colleague over there. I wanted to quit every 3 months.
Yeah, so basically, since you said you wanted to quit a couple times and leave the industry, I'm just curious to know what kept you there and what kept you passionate about it.
Okay, so I did quit once. I left because I felt like my entire identity was reporter. Like everything about me, everything I did, everything I was thinking about, what is the next story, and I was so caught up in that. All my phone calls were to my producer, and all we did was talk about the next. I mean, it was my entire life, and I just didn't want it to be just that. And so I walked away. I moved to Spain to take Spanish classes because I was like, I got to do something with this energy. Like, I cannot just be on holiday. I will lose my mind. And it was the best thing I ever did for myself. I had just paid off my student loans. It was the first job that I had that actually made money, where I could pay my own rent, buy my own clothes, and go out to eat. People thought I was absolutely insane, but it was the best thing because what it did for me was it gave me a different perspective, and it made me realize, hey, I miss it. I miss the business. And when I say that, I mean the writing, the interviewing, the putting together a story, the being able to tell someone's story on a large platform. I missed the mechanics of doing that. And so I came back. And I was lucky enough to be able to come back. But I came back, and I came back with a whole different perspective, much happier, much less in my head, because I realized that I actually did pick the right thing for me. So that was good. Now, you asked what made me want to become an anchor. For most of my career, I did not want to be an anchor, except I realized when someone sent me an article. I played volleyball for the University of Florida, home of the Fighting Gators, sorry. I played volleyball for the University of Florida, and they had this thing where they asked us who we wanted to be and blah, blah, blah. And I always thought I had said Mike Wallace. Like, I had been telling the story thinking, like, yeah, wanted to be 60 Minutes, Mike Wallace. Guess what I wrote? Oh, guess what I wrote? Barbara Walters.
Wow.
I wanted Barbara Walters, because I used to watch 2020. That was back in the day. Well, it's been a minute. But so, and she anchored, and she had a show, but she was dynamic, and she was like a trailblazer. And so for me, I always liked the stories. I loved to learn something, especially ones that were sort of biographical about someone, where they would find somebody, the 60 Minutes would go and they'd find someone, and you're like, I never knew that existed. And I loved true stories. I loved it when my mom, when I was a little kid, I didn't want her necessarily to read a book. I wanted her to tell me about when she was my age. What was happening? What did she do? What was it like? I'm sure she made some of it up because I was incessant and I wanted it every single day. But I loved stories that were true about people. Just as early as I can remember. I loved that. I loved knowing it. I loved understanding it. And I'm really, really, really curious about other people's lives. And I don't care what you do. I don't care if you're a janitor or a maid or the president, or it makes no difference. Because to me, if it's a life I haven't led, it's interesting. So first it was telling a story and learning about other people. I actually really do love people. I know everyone's like, oh, I hate people. And some days, okay. But generally, I really do love people, and I'm interested in them. Later on, just recently, because I've said no to this before. I mean, not this particular show, but I've said no to anchoring in my career several times because I loved being in the streets. I loved it, and I still do, and that won't end. I will continue to do some of that. This is a new experience for me. I've been at CNN now for 15 years, and this was like, you know what? Yeah. And I was scared. So this is not what I do. I was like, I don't know, I might be terrible at this, and this might go very wrong. It hasn't, because I have two incredible co-anchors and a great team, but this was a new opportunity, and I just decided change is good, scary but good.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Can we have a hand of applause for Sabina? Is she good?